Hi everyone, this is Victoria from Elite Medical Prep, and today we have a really interesting interview lined up for you guys. We're going to be talking to Lindsey from Moon Prep, who is a college admissions advisor, specifically having to do with the BSMD college admissions track. So, as we kind of move into the MCAT side of tutoring, we wanted to cover just kind of some of the common questions and programs and all of that stuff that we see that our users are interested in and searching. So very commonly, BSMD programs are found for students that are looking for a way to get into medical school without having to take the MCAT. Now, Lindsay's going to talk more about that. This is not always necessarily true, but you asked, we answered, so let's get into it. Hi, Lindsay. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. So today we're talking about a very interesting topic that we see has quite a bit of search volume around the web, which is the BSMD medical school route for students. So I understand you are with Kristen Moon and Moon Prep. Could you say a couple words just about yourself and your background before we jump right in to admissions?
Yeah, for sure. I'm an independent college counselor at Min Prep, and most of what our focus is working with students who are interested in like the direct med pathway, BSMD programs, BAMD programs,
Okay.
BSDO programs, whatever you might see them being called. They're all kind of the same thing.
Mhm.
And so we work really closely with them. About 80% of our students are going down those pathways, and so a lot of what our work is helping them build their profile. Helping them, actually apply to the schools because it's a little bit more complicated than just applying to
Right.
an undergrad university because of course you're also applying to the med school. So a lot of work, but huge benefits because you a lot of times get that guaranteed spot of a med school admissions.
Well, which is certainly sought after. So that's a perfect segue into for people that might not know before we get too far down this road, what is a BSMD track for students?
Yeah, for sure. So there are different couple different ways, but kind of the way that we help most students with is when you're applying as a senior in high school.
Okay.
And so a lot of the times the initial application will be in to the university, and you have to of course get accepted to the university as well.
Yeah.
But you'll be applying to the med school too. And so there are a lot of benefits of this because essentially you are committing to a program, and it could be a 6-year program, a 7-year program, maybe an 8-year program. So you might save a little bit of time. But if for students who are 100% sure that they want to be a doctor,
Mhm.
it can be a really great way to guarantee that spot. You don't have to stress. You don't have to go through the stressful med school application, later in college. You almost always are guaranteed a spot. Of course, each BSMD program will be different and will have its own rules. Sometimes you don't have to take the MCAT. Sometimes you do have to take the MCAT, but you have to get a certain score. Sometimes you just take it, no minimum score needed. Sometimes it's accelerated, as I mentioned, 6, 7 year program. And then, sometimes you're not guaranteed actually a spot in the program, just
Oh
guaranteed
wow.
you. Yeah. So there's a lot of different rules. And so that's why I think it is important to work with someone who does
Cool.
understand the different nuances of each program because each one has their own steps, their own kind of processes. Do you apply to the undergrad first, the BSMD program first,
Right.
the honor college first? A lot of different work, but essentially, in a nutshell, most of the time you're getting pretty much a guaranteed spot into the BSMD or into the medical school.
Okay, very cool. And so that's kind of perfect. You've already answered some of our questions. But the next thing that I want to talk about is what are all of the benefits to applying to a program like this? It sounds like you kind of get that guaranteed spot. Maybe you don't need to stress. But are there other benefits to applying to medical school BSMD in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several. And I think the big one that a lot of people think about is just time and
Sure.
also money as well. Because a lot of them, like I said, not a lot. There are a few that are 6-year programs. You are, nose to the grindstone for
Right,
those
right.
years. But, you do save 2 years of tuition. So it can be a huge benefit. You're in the workforce a lot quicker. Um, you save a lot of time and you save a lot of money. It can be really nice. And of course, applying to med school is not cheap either. Um, most students are applying to, 20 or more schools.
Yeah.
Taking the MCAT's expensive. Just attending a lot of different programs and, spending a lot of time volunteering and doing research. Really focusing on building your resume for those 3 years before you're applying to med school can be really stressful. So this kind of takes the edge off a little bit. And so I think that those are kind of the two big ones is, time and money. And if you're 100% sure that you want to be a doctor, and so that's what a lot of our work with our students is making sure that they, have proven that they understand what the role of being a doctor is. It's more than just being like, oh yeah, like that
Right.
sounds like your career.
Right.
Because I think everyone at one point in their life has been like, doctor sounds cool. Like we all play doctor. Um, but we want to make sure that that goes much deeper than that. They've shadowed doctors. Maybe they worked in a clinical setting, even in the midst of pandemic. Still finding ways to understand what the role of medicine is. And so, for our students who are really sure of it, it can be a really good opportunity for them.
So, out of personal curiosity, what would happen if a student were to get accepted and be part of a BSMD program, and then they just woke up one morning and decided, I don't want to be a doctor anymore?
For sure. Yeah, and it definitely does happen. And so that's why you sometimes will see like, the rates, they don't always have 100% graduation rate because it's a big commitment at a young age.
So it's not binding. It's not like you're in this, you're stuck. Okay.
No, exactly. So there are different things. Of course, no BSMD program is the same, but if you're going kind of the traditional path or a traditional timeline, so it's a 4-year undergrad, 4-year medical school, it's not going to really change anything. Because you're still going to get your degree, your undergrad degree at the normal time. And the good thing about some BSMD programs too is you don't always have to major in a science. You can be doing, psychology. You can be doing history. You can be doing a lot of things that really aren't, biology or chemistry or something like that, which I think can be kind of is sometimes surprising to our students that they think, oh, I have to do biology and that's it. And that's definitely not the case. So some students are kind of exploring their secondary interests and might discover that that actually is the right path for them. And so if you're going kind of the traditional route, no big changes. You can drop out, you can change. Um, if you're doing more of an accelerated program, it kind of depends, but especially the 6-year program,
Yeah.
a lot of the times you don't get your undergrad degree until 4 years of study, no
Right.
matter where you are in the process. So you could be a year and a half into med school and you're just now getting your undergrad degree.
Wow.
Yes, so that makes it a little bit more
Okay.
challenging. Of course, you can drop out at any point, but if you decide you wanted to switch medical schools, you don't have your undergraduate degree, so you have to kind of wait.
Right.
If you decide to switch out, you might have to continue and finish up some of your requirements, graduation requirements. So each one's a little bit different, and it can be a little bit challenging, but some are really open and some will allow you to apply outside of different medical schools. Some are really strict and you can only attend that medical school. And if you apply out, you are giving up your spot in the medical school. So there's definitely not one size fits all for BSMT
Yeah,
programs.
it sounds like it. So it
Yeah.
seems like we've talked a little bit about the pros and the cons, and one pro that I'm wondering about is I would assume that if you are kind of on this direct admissions or pre-enrollment, I guess we could call it, kind of path, you don't have to take the MCAT. Is that a true statement, or it's kind of varied by program?
Varied by program because
Okay.
sometimes you don't. So some of them you do have to get a minimum score at least.
Okay.
Okay, I guess there's 3 different levels. Don't have to take the MCAT at all,
Mhm.
which is fantastic. Obviously, you save yourself a ton of time. Sometimes you do have to take the MCAT and you have to get a minimum score. And
Okay.
so the minimum score will vary from year to year. Sometimes it's as low as 495.
Okay.
Sometimes it's as high as 511.
Wow. Okay.
So it can be pretty intense. Usually, a lot of the times, what you'll see is like the 80% benchmark is what schools are looking for, and that will vary, of course, from year to year. Other schools just require you to take the MCAT, no minimum score required. So, you could get whatever as minimum as you wanted. It doesn't really matter. And then some just require you to take a practice exam. So there's
Wow.
a wide variety of different things. And the good news is some BSMD programs will really help you prepare for this as well. They might enroll you like in a course with your like classmates and things like that, kind of free of
Okay.
charge. Other times you're kind of on your own, so it does vary from school to school. And sometimes you do have to get that high score. Like
Right.
Hofstra is one that I can think of off the top of my head. their minimum's a 5.11, and you have to get that on your first try. So
Wow.
it's intimidating to some of my students who are
Yeah.
kind of thinking about going there or not to go there.
Right. So you mentioned some of your students kind of thinking about what to do. What kind of student would this be an attractive option for? And I guess maybe the greater question to be asked here is how competitive are these programs? Is this just an option that is good for anybody who feels set on becoming a physician, or is there kind of a specific type or demographic of student that this would kind of work better for?
Yeah, definitely. So academic excellence is like one thing that most
Yeah.
programs are really looking for. Your minimum high school GPA has to be at least a 3.5, usually to even get looked at.
Okay.
And your SAT scores anywhere from like a 1400 or so onwards, upwards. And same thing for the
Do you know how
ACT.
that would convert for ACT for students who might be on that side of things?
Yeah, so usually if you have, I mean, we like it whenever they have a 32 because once you have a 32, you
Right,
can pretty much apply to any program. SAT, we usually recommend students have at least a 1500 because once again,
right, right.
any program then is open to you. The higher, not necessarily the better, but as long as you're getting your foot in the door, you have a 34 or so, you're pretty good for the ACT. You don't need to get a 36. You don't
Mhm,
need to get a 1600.
mhm.
Um, because at that point it's just a difference of a few questions. It's not almost worth the energy it would take to get a little bit higher. But there are like some programs, like for example, University of Central Florida has a minimum score of 1500. So you can apply, but they're not going to look at you unless your SAT score is a 1500, unless your ACT score is a 34.
Mhm.
Um, and so, there are programs that, require only a 27 or a 26 even of the ACT or
Right,
a 1200 for the SAT. So there are programs for maybe students who just aren't as good at taking tests.
mhm,
Less options, but there are still options.
mhm.
Um, and so that's really one thing that we really stress for our students is, students who have applied themselves, who've taken AP courses, IB courses, IB curriculum. And so, have been challenged themselves in school and do have, a pretty great
Right,
GPA. But we've worked with students who, barely have a 3.5 and they've still gotten into BSMD programs because they
wow,
did apply widely. So,
okay,
it is always possible. So that's definitely like kind of the first box to check.
yeah,
But the more important box, and similar to med school, if you have your MCAT score, you have your GPA, you're in the door, but your resume, your essays, your interview, like that's where your personality shines.
okay,
And so that's really where students, have to spend that time and that effort is looking, like I said before, trying to prove that they understand what the role of medicine is, to prove that dedication essentially, because a lot of them are like 16, 17, maybe 18 years old,
mhm.
um, and committing to, an 8-year path. And
Yeah,
so,
that's a big deal. I
yeah,
don't know
exactly.
where I was at 16, 17, but,
I'm not doing what
not
I thought
an
I was doing,
experience
that's for
with
sure.
right,
And so it's hard. It's hard for them to prove it. And so the shadowing is really essential. The volunteering is essential. Maybe research too. So students who kind of check that box, who are leaders. But it really does depend on the program. So because some are more focused on research, some are more focused on like a liberal arts student. So finding the right program for the student is a lot of what we do because yeah, you could get into a program, but that doesn't mean that you would be happy there.
right,
So we try and find the right fit essentially for the student
sure.
as well.
So I don't wanna put you too much on the spot. This is another question that I have just thought of as I'm listening to you speak. Do you happen to know kind of what is the average acceptance rate amongst just kind of like all of the programs? Is this something that you mentioned you've been able to match some students that are maybe having lower scores or kind of barely being a considered like a person being considered for this pool of applicants, but um, I'm trying to kind of gauge like how competitive is this because it sounds like this is something that I actually have not heard of personally until a couple days ago when we started speaking and saw all these questions and wanted to do this interview. So is are there tons of programs that it's this is a thing that's maybe not impossible to get into without something like consulting or advising, or is it really something that it is so competitive that you're probably better off kind of talking to someone first?
Yeah. So there are quite a few programs out there, like for just BSMD, where you're applying out of high school,
Yeah.
maybe 80 or 90. For
Oh,
BS,
that's
yeah, there's
higher than I would have thought. Yeah. Okay.
exactly. And for BSDO, there actually are a ton because Lake Erie College of Medicine has like a ton of like feeder schools into their program as well.
Mhm.
And so like a lot of or smaller universities are kind of what they partner with, but
Yeah.
it's a good opportunity if you want to stay close to home. And so there's probably like 100 plus of just DO programs as
Wow.
well.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
it is definitely a possibility. But that being said, if you had your eye on the top most competitive
Of course.
you
Right.
are not
We
gonna.
would recommend the same.
Yes, exactly. So balanced list is key. So like for example, Brown University's PLME program is one of the more popular ones.
Yeah.
And so in 2021, they had about 3,500 applicants,
Okay.
and then ultimately 96 were accepted.
Okay.
So about a 2% acceptance rate.
Right.
Which isn't as bad as you would think for like the Ivy League, the only Ivy League BSMD program.
Okay.
Another really competitive one is Rice University, and this year they had 1,600 applicants, and they have 6 seats, and so considerably less seats, and then a point, 4% acceptance rate
Yeah.
or so. And so that's the biggest problem
Right.
with
Right.
BSMD programs is, it's different from med school, maybe 100 spots or so.
Mhm.
Um, a lot of these programs have spots,
Right.
6 spots, maybe 20 spots. Brown is one of the bigger ones with like almost 100. UMKC, University of Missouri, Kansas City, they have maybe 115 or so. But it's just like med school admissions. You really have to look at in-state preferences. So
Okay.
you might look at UMKC and be like, okay, 120 spots or so, like I've got a decent chance of getting into that school. But kind of the one little caveat is over half those seats are going to Missouri students.
Okay.
Another 30 are going to like regional states like Arkansas, Kansas, Illinois.
That's good to know.
Um, yeah, and then 10 to 15 are from elsewhere. So if you're from Florida and you see, okay, they've got 115 spots, that's pretty good. You're
Right.
actually only competing for 10 or 15
Right.
spots
Right.
against a wide variety of states. So
Right.
there are a lot of state only programs or state heavy programs. So kind of paying attention to things like that are super key. And there are some programs that don't have caps on seats available. A lot of those programs though are, paired with a Caribbean school. So a little less attractive to students, but would be considerably easier to get into just because there's no cap.
Right.
And so as long as you're building the BSMD list, as long as you're applying to 10 or more schools or 10 or more BSMD programs, I would say you have a pretty good chance of getting into a program.
Right. Awesome. Well, I think that was all the questions that we really had. The one other thing was what makes a strong applicant, but I think we've already kind of talked about that in terms of test scores and having a really nice resume and your volunteer service, and all of these other kind of factors. Was there anything last kind of words about that that you might want to add?
For sure. So I think one other thing is that we have students who maybe have started, we're really into computer science or something like that for the first 2 years of their high school. And then they discover medicine and they're like, oh, like I really think this is awesome. And they're like, I don't know if I would be competitive because a lot of my background isn't with medicine.
Mhm.
And so like, it's totally fine. Of course, you're expected at 14 years old to 15 years old to be exploring your high school, like exploring different careers. So it's totally fine. Your resume shouldn't be 100% medicine. It shouldn't be 100% STEM and those types of things because you're going to have other interests.
Right.
And it's just like med school. You want to have kind of that interesting hook. um, and so that's something we work a lot with our students on is like passion projects,
Okay.
uh, about how they can use their love of art, how they can use their desire to help, um, with helping with coding or something like that, to for other students, their love of poetry, whatever it might be. So working with them on how to take what they already like doing and then elevate it and have impact on others. That takes time. It's just like med school. You
Yeah.
can't make a strong application in 6 months. So starting if you're younger is key. If you didn't start younger, it's okay. You just might have to work a little bit harder. and start the application process early as well,
Mhm.
because it's a lot of writing, a lot of work. So the most competitive BSMD students are the ones who kind of have put a lot of thought into their applications, who started early. They didn't start their essays, at 10 p.m. when they're due to look. Um,
Yeah, makes
kind of
sense.
basic things that make sense, but a lot of the times it doesn't happen. I mean, sometimes they do get in, and it's surprising to all of us, but it's stressful. It's stressful for everyone. So
Yeah,
I think my biggest piece of advice for anyone who's interested in BSMD is to, do your research on the programs, and to start early. That's the biggest gift you can give yourself.
awesome. Well, thank you so much. I think this has been incredibly informative. I certainly feel like I have a better handle on kind of the world of BSMD applications. Thank you so much for being here and for taking the time to talk with us. Um, you know, thanks.
Thank you for having me. And if you guys want the complete list of BSMD programs, we do have one on our website.
Okay,
Spent a lot of time. It's like at www.moonprep.com.
awesome.
And yeah,
I think we can probably link that below or something, so easy
yeah, that'd
access.
be great. Yeah.
Perfect. All
Awesome.
right, awesome. All right, that's all the time that we have for this video. Again, a huge thank you to Lindsey from Moon Prep for being with us to answer the questions that you might have and clarify a little bit about who the BSMD program might be good for, kind of its pros, its cons, its competitiveness, all that good stuff. So we hope very much that you got some good information out of this video. If you have further questions or comments, go ahead and drop them below. And otherwise, make sure to hit subscribe, and thank you so much for watching.